The year is 2 BC, the second year of the Yuanshu era in the Han Empire. In the Weiyang Palace, the heart of imperial power, the 24-year-old emperor issues a decree that sends shockwaves through his court. The emperor's 22-year-old male favorite, a young man named Dong Xian, is appointed to the office of Grand Marshal and concurrently made the head of the imperial secretariat. For those unfamiliar with the Han government, the explosive nature of this appointment is hard to grasp. Let's break it down. Grand Marshal was one of the 3 Grand Excellencies, the nominal supreme commander of the entire military, the equivalent of a modern Secretary of Defense and chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, combined. And head of the imperial secretariat meant he controlled the central nervous system of the imperial government, the channel through which all official documents passed. One is the pinnacle of military power, the other the core of political authority. To grant both to a single person was an extraordinary concentration of power. Historically, only a seasoned and powerful regent, a figure like the legendary Huo Guang, could ever hope to attain such an honor. And who was Dong Xian? A few years prior, he was a minor court attendant, a young man whose job was to announce the time of day. He had no glorious military victories, no distinguished record of governance. His only talent was his stunning beauty and the emperor's absolute, unconditional love for him. Even before this ultimate promotion, Dong Xian had enjoyed unprecedented favor. He was by the emperor's side day and night, inseparable. His wife was granted the extraordinary privilege of entering the palace at will, even living with him inside the imperial grounds, an unheard-of breach of protocol in the strictly hierarchical Han court. His sister was made an imperial consort of high rank, second only to the empress. The emperor ordered a lavish, palace-like mansion to be built for Dong Xian right next to the imperial palace, and bestowed upon him the finest weapons and most precious jewels from the national treasury, in a display of luxury that surpassed even the emperor's own. Most astonishingly, the emperor even ordered a tomb for Dong Xian to be constructed right next to his own imperial mausoleum, the ultimate honor symbolizing an eternal companionship. And yet, in that very same year, on the other side of the world, the city of Rome was celebrating the zenith of an era. After decades of civil war and chaos, a man named Octavian, now known as Augustus, had brought peace and order to the Roman world. In this year, the magnificent Forum of Augustus and its centerpiece, the Temple of Mars Ultor, were finally dedicated amidst jubilant crowds. The Roman Senate bestowed upon the 60-year-old Augustus a supreme honor, the title Pater Patriae, Father of the Fatherland. After 25 years of rule, he was the undisputed first citizen, the living embodiment of Roman tradition and order. His authority seemed unshakable. One was a shocking display of imperial favoritism, an appointment that defied all political logic. The other was a well-earned prize, a status built brick by brick on military glory and political acumen. This stark contrast seemed to foreshadow the diverging paths of the two super-empires. The Roman Empire, like a rising sun, was entering its golden age. The 200-year-old Han Empire, however, would collapse in just 10 years.
Hello everyone and welcome to China Puzzle. I'm ZYQ. Today, our story begins with a famous Chinese idiom, Duan Xiu Ji Pi, the passion of the cut sleeve. The story goes that Emperor Ai of Han was deeply in love with his male favorite, Dong Xian. They were inseparable, sharing the same carriage by day and the same bed by night. One afternoon, as they were napping together, the emperor awoke to an urgent state matter, but his sleeve was trapped beneath the head of the handsome young Dong Xian, who was sleeping soundly. Looking at his beloved's peaceful face, the emperor couldn't bear to disturb him. So he drew his dagger carefully, silently, and sliced his own sleeve in half, then quietly rose and left. In the subtle and reserved culture of China, the cut sleeve has since become one of the most elegant and enduring euphemisms for male same-sex love, largely because the story's protagonists and its consequences were so famous. And so, we must ask the question posed in our title. did the mighty 200-year-old Han Dynasty, with no major external threats or internal rebellions, truly crumble in just 10 years because of one emperor's profound love for another man? Let's get the macro-level conclusion out of the way first. Of course not. No single royal favorite, whether male or female, can be the true cause of a dynasty's fall. But on a micro level, the rise of Dong Xian and the emperor's extraordinary devotion to their relationship was indeed a powerful catalyst that hastened the empire's demise.
First, let's look at the bigger picture. Contrary to what many might assume, ancient China was far more open-minded about same-sex relationships than later periods. In the Han Dynasty at least, an emperor having a male companion was far from a shocking scandal. In Han China, particularly among the upper classes, bisexuality was quite common and not subject to the strict moral condemnation of later dynasties. This, in a way, mirrors the cultural norms of ancient Greece and Rome. Of the 12 emperors of the Western Han, historical records suggest that at least 10 of them had male companions. This tradition can be traced back to the dynasty's very founder, the rough-hewn, commoner-turned-emperor Liu Bang. Despite his reputation for being a gruff warrior, he too was captivated by a young man named Ji Ru. As the great historian Sima Qian recorded in his Records of the Grand Historian, there was a time when the front lines were in crisis, and the generals were desperate for the emperor's orders. But Liu Bang had locked himself in his chambers and refused to see anyone. An enraged general finally broke down the door, only to find the emperor resting his head on Ji Ru's lap. Sima Qian noted that Ji Ru had no talent whatsoever, yet high officials had to go through him to even speak to the emperor. This set a precedent. Immense political influence could be gained through private intimacy. After Liu Bang, this culture of male favoritism continued throughout the Han court. Emperor Wen, renowned for his frugality, was incredibly generous to his favorite, Deng Tong. He gifted Deng an entire copper mountain, granting him the right to mint his own coins, making him one of the wealthiest men in the empire. The great Emperor Wu, one of the most martial emperors in Chinese history, who vastly expanded the empire's borders, also had his male companions. The histories state that he shared the same bed and board with men like Han Yan and the musician Li Yannian. This shows that having a male partner was not seen as a sign of weakness. Even Emperor Xuan, considered one of the dynasty's best rulers, was rumored to have an unusually close relationship with Zhang Pengzu, the son of a prominent general. Later histories had to explicitly clarify that they were merely childhood classmates, a clear sign of the rampant gossip at the time. These relationships were all formally documented in the official histories, in a chapter titled The Biographies of the Flatterers and Favorites. But it's crucial to note what the ancient historians were criticizing. Their condemnation was never about same-sex love itself. It was about excessive favor, when this private relationship disrupted public order, led to corruption, or threatened the stability of the dynasty. In other words, there was an unofficial but tacitly accepted system of male favorites in the Han court, existing in parallel with the harem of empresses and concubines. It provided the emperor with emotional solace and personal loyalty that politically arranged marriages often could not. However, this system contained a huge structural risk. What happens when an emperor decides to break the unwritten rules and grant one of these unofficial, private sphere favorites the highest official, institutional power? This is the key to why the story of Emperor Ai and Dong Xian is different.
Having a male favorite was business as usual for a Han emperor. Appointing a male favorite as the supreme commander of the army and the de facto head of government was absolutely not. Emperor Ai's appointment of Dong Xian shattered the unspoken boundary, elevating a private affection to an unprecedented political peak. Let's compare Dong Xian to his predecessors. Emperor Gaozu's Ji Ru could control access to the emperor, but he held no formal military or political title. Emperor Wen's Deng Tong was fabulously wealthy, but he never commanded an army or ran the imperial bureaucracy. Emperor Wu's companions could share his bed, but they never entered the ranks of the three Grand Excellencies or had a say in state policy. Even Emperor Cheng's favorite, Zhang Fang, was repeatedly exiled from the capital by the Empress Dowager and never held a core government post. Dong Xian, however, received it all: wealth, titles, proximity, and, uniquely, supreme institutional power. This decision ignited the fury of the entire ruling class.
At the time, two major power blocks were utterly disgusted and terrified by this. The first were the power brokers, the traditional aristocratic clans, particularly the family of the Empress. Before Emperor Ai, power had been firmly in the hands of the Empress Dowager Wang Zhengjun's family, the Wang clan. These families had spent generations climbing the ladder of power through strategic marriages and political maneuvering. They saw the top government posts as their exclusive domain. Dong Xian, a nouveau riche with no family background, had leapfrogged over all of them. To them, this was not just a humiliation. It was a mortal threat to the foundation of their power. The second were the ideological guardians, the scholar officials who adhered to Confucianism. By this time, Confucian thought was becoming the official state ideology. Its core belief was that the state should be governed by virtuous and educated gentlemen, the Shi, who earned their positions through merit and who upheld a strict moral and social order. In their eyes, Dong Xian's rise was an absolute moral catastrophe. It was the triumph of private vice, Ning, over public virtue, a complete subversion of the state's principles. It proved that the emperor himself was morally unfit to rule. Faced with this opposition, Emperor Ai's reaction was not to compromise, but to crush it. The chancellor at the time, Wang Jia, an upright official, repeatedly warned the emperor against excessively rewarding Dong Xian. As a result, he was framed for a crime, thrown in prison, and ultimately forced to starve himself to death. With this act, Emperor Ai sent a chilling message to all: to criticize my beloved is treason. Even more ominously, in the official decree appointing Dong Xian, Emperor Ai used language typically reserved for abdicating the throne, calling Dong a heaven-sent minister destined to assist him. This shocked everyone who read it, as if the emperor was hinting at an even greater role for Dong Xian in the future. Ironically, the rise of Dong Xian managed to unite two groups that were normally rivals: the power-hungry aristocrats and the morally preaching scholars. The nobles opposed him because he threatened their power. The scholars opposed him because he violated their principles. This strange, united front pushed the emperor into unprecedented political isolation, setting the stage for his eventual despair.
So far, the story might seem a bit cliché, right? A foolish emperor whose fatal weakness was simply a man instead of a beautiful woman. But here comes the major twist. Emperor Ai, Liu Xin, did not initially intend to give his empire away as a gift to his lover. On the contrary, at the beginning of his reign, he was the most promising and eagerly anticipated monarch the dynasty had seen in nearly half a century. To understand his initial ambition, we have to look at the mess left behind by his two mediocre predecessors. Emperor Yuan, 49 to 33 BC, he was a sentimental scholar emperor, more interested in music and Confucian theory than in governing. His weakness and indecisiveness led to the rise of eunuch influence, and crucially, he inaugurated the era of consort family dominance. It was under his reign that the family of his empress, Wang Zhengjun, the Wang clan, began their systematic seizure of power. Emperor Cheng, 33 to 7 BC. If Emperor Yuan was weak, Emperor Cheng was utterly dissolute. He was lost in a haze of wine and women, leaving all state affairs to his maternal uncles, the Wang brothers. He openly violated the founding emperor's decree that only men of merit could be made marquises, handing out titles to his family. His harem was dominated by the infamous Zhao sisters, and to please them, he even allowed his own infant sons to be murdered, leaving him without an heir. His reign was a disaster of corruption, neglect, and court intrigue. It was in this bleak landscape that the young nephew, Liu Xin, was chosen as the heir. He was the polar opposite of his uncle. The court and the people saw him as intelligent, articulate, and capable. When the 20-year-old ascended the throne as Emperor Ai, the entire empire breathed a sigh of relief. They hoped this young, energetic ruler would be a new Emperor Wu or Emperor Xuan, a man who could restore order, purge the corrupt Wang clan, and bring glory back to the Han Dynasty. And initially, Emperor Ai lived up to these expectations. He moved decisively to end the Wang clan's power monopoly, showed great diligence in state affairs, and made efforts to cut down on lavish court spending. So, how did such a promising beginning lead to such a catastrophic failure?
Emperor Ai's tragedy was that he correctly diagnosed the empire's disease, the dominance of consort families, but the medicine he used to treat it was an even more potent poison. He had inherited a hollowed-out throne. The neglect of his predecessors meant that real power had shifted from the institutional authority of the emperor to the private power of the Empresses family. To get power back, Emperor Ai sadly realized he had no independent political base to rely on. His only option was to fight one consort clan by propping up another. His reform was doomed from the start. His early reign was a two-front war against the corrupt system he had inherited. The first front was political, to destroy the Wang clan's monopoly. The second front was economic, to curb the endless expansion of the wealthy landed elite. On the political front, he played the family card. He was caught between two mothers, his legal grandmother, the Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhengjun, representing the old guard, and his biological grandmother, Empress Dowager Fu. His ambitious grandmother Fu became his main weapon against the Wangs, constantly pressuring him to grant her own family members titles and real power. Emperor Ai went along with it, systematically stripping the Wangs of their positions and installing his own relatives, the Fu and Ding clans, in the highest government posts. This led to the bizarre spectacle of four Empress Dowagers coexisting in the court, creating unprecedented political chaos. On the economic front, his reform was even more ambitious, striking at the empire's fundamental contradiction. He tried to solve the most severe social issue of the time, the extreme concentration of land and slaves. The problem: decades of unchecked growth had allowed the elite to swallow up vast tracts of land and owned thousands of slaves, while the independent farmers who formed the empire's tax base were going bankrupt and becoming tenants or debt slaves. This was not only creating massive social unrest, but also starving the state of revenue. In 7 BC, a radical reform was proposed. It aimed to set a legal cap on the amount of land and the number of slaves that could be owned by anyone, from the highest princes down to the common people. For example, a prince would be limited to 3,000 acres of land and 200 slaves, where previously there was no limit at all. With these reforms, Emperor Ai was actually trying to turn back the clock to the glorious age of Emperor Wu, an era of strong central authority, heavy state intervention in the economy, and harsh suppression of local elites. But he failed, because the times had changed. The elite that Emperor Wu had tamed had, by Emperor Ai's time, become the government itself. His reform was a declaration of war on his own ruling class. A young emperor's ambition soon shattered against the wall of entrenched interests. First came the counterattack from the Wang clan. Though temporarily out of power, their influence was deeply rooted. The Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhengjun used her moral authority to protect her family's interests. Her nephew Wang Mang, though forced into retirement, remained a spiritual leader of the old guard with a huge public reputation, ready to make a comeback at any moment. But the fatal blow came not from his enemies, but from his allies. In the most ironic twist of the story, the details of the land and slave limitation law were leaked. The law designed to crush the old aristocracy also threatened the new one. The Fu and Ding clans, whom Emperor Ai had promoted, had also quickly become massive landowners. They realized the emperor's reforms were about to hit them too. At the critical moment, they betrayed him. To protect their own newfound wealth, the Fu and Ding clans joined the opposition. The emperor's political foundation crumbled overnight. The result was a total political fiasco. The ambitious reform plan was watered down into a meaningless decree. The core issue of land ownership was completely abandoned. At this moment, Emperor Ai found himself in a hopeless position. His grand plans were in ruins, the old guard hated him, and his own family had abandoned him for profit. He was utterly alone, a prisoner in a palace full of enemies and fair-weather friends.
This reform's failure exposed the fundamental, unsolvable contradiction of the late Western Han. The state's political structure and its economic needs were now in direct conflict. Politically, the emperor had to rely on the powerful consort clans to rule, but economically, the empire desperately needed to protect its broad tax base of independent farmers. And here was the fatal trap. Any attempt to save the economy by limiting the land-grabbing elite would immediately trigger a political crisis because the elite were the government. The system was locked in a self-destructive death spiral, and Emperor Ai was trapped right at its center. Politically defeated and utterly isolated, he abandoned all practical efforts to govern. His health also began to deteriorate. He turned to the last resort of a desperate ruler, mysticism and symbolism.
At the time, a new mystical form of Confucianism was in vogue, one filled with prophecies and omens. A popular theory claimed that the Han Dynasty's mandate of heaven was fated to last for only 210 years and was nearing its end. Everything seemed to confirm this mystical prophecy. Starting from the death of the great Emperor Xuan, the official records of the next two reigns, Emperor Yuan and Emperor Cheng, became filled with an alarming number of natural disasters and celestial omens. During Emperor Yuan's reign of just over a decade, 17 such events were recorded. The kind-hearted but weak emperor was so terrified by these signs that he issued at least 10 edicts of self-blame, publicly apologizing to heaven for his failings. But under his son, Emperor Cheng, things got dramatically worse. The number of recorded disasters and omens skyrocketed to a shocking 46. Across the vast lands of the Han Empire, a new catastrophe seemed to strike almost every single season. In 5 BC, some scholars claimed they had received a divine message. By simply changing the era name, the emperor could usher in a new golden age and even cure his chronic illness. Clinging to this last hope, Emperor Ai immediately embraced the idea. He changed his era name and gave himself a bizarre new title, calling himself the Emperor of Supreme Peace. But this act earned him not the reverence of his subjects, but the ridicule of the empire. It was an obvious act of desperation. Changing a name couldn't solve a single real-world problem. It only exposed his weakness and made him look like a fool trying to use magic to wish his problems away. His authority, already fragile, was now completely shattered. This moment symbolized the emperor's total detachment from the reality of governance. The Han system was supposed to be a blend of Confucian moral legitimacy and legalist authoritarian methods. Emperor Ai had failed on both fronts. His legalist attempt at reform had failed, and his personal conduct had destroyed his Confucian moral authority. It was in this state of total political and ideological bankruptcy that he jumped headfirst into mysticism.
And now, we can return to the beginning of our story. It was in this moment of profound political and spiritual despair that Emperor Ai's affection for Dong Xian transformed from infatuation into an all-consuming obsession. Let's try to understand the young emperor's psyche. In a court filled with betrayal, hostility, and contempt, Dong Xian became the only person he could trust. Dong Xian's loyalty was purely personal, untainted by any political faction. Dong Xian was no longer just a lover. He was the emperor's only spiritual sanctuary, his only source of warmth in a cold, hostile world. The more the political world failed him, the more he poured his emotions, his wealth, and the very power of the state into this one relationship. Those seemingly absurd promotions were not just expressions of love, They were acts of desperate defiance. By elevating Dong Xian above everyone else, Emperor Ai was symbolically taking revenge on the entire political system that had rejected him. Every title granted to Dong Xian was a slap in the face to the Wangs, the Fus, the Dings, and all the scholar officials who opposed him. And here's a crucial detail that reveals the depth of his resolve. When the emperor appointed Dong Xian as Grand Marshal, he stripped that very title from his own maternal uncle, Ding Ming.
The twisted climax of this psychology came at a court banquet. The emperor, likely drunk, looked at Dong Xian and said, "I wish to follow the example of the sage King Yao and abdicate the throne to you." The statement was so shocking that a minister immediately rebuked him. "The empire belongs to your ancestors, not to you personally. The throne must be passed down to your descendants. The Son of Heaven does not make jokes." Though the emperor took no further action, this joke sent a chill through the entire court. In the minds of the elite, Dong Xian was unfit to even be a minister, let alone an emperor. There's a telling detail. Dong Xian's father tried to arrange a marriage for his other son with the prestigious Xiao clan. But the Xiao family, even though their own patriarch had been dead for years, refused. "Your son, the Grand Marshal," they said, "was appointed with the words, 'grasp the center,' the very words used when the sage King Yao abdicated to Shun. All the old ministers who saw that decree are terrified. How can our daughter bear such a fate?" Dong Xian's father could only sigh, "What has our family done to be feared to such a degree?" A year later, the Jiongnu Chanyu visited the capital. At a grand banquet, he saw the young Grand Marshal and was puzzled. Through a translator, he asked who the young man was. The emperor instructed the translator to reply, "Though he is young, he holds this position because of his great virtue." The Xiongnu leader immediately stood up, bowed, and congratulated the Han Empire on having found such a worthy minister. The Chanyu was a foreigner, but he was no fool. These scenes, as crazy as they seem, were the logical conclusion of the emperor's warped worldview. If the traditional bureaucratic system had failed him, he would destroy it and choose a successor based purely on love and personal loyalty. It was, without a doubt, the final defiant cry of a broken-hearted emperor. In the year 1 BC, the 25-year-old Emperor Ai died. His all-powerful Grand Marshal Dong Xian was completely paralyzed by the sudden turn of events, utterly lost and indecisive. But the embodiment of the old system, the Grand Empress Dowager Wang Zhengjun, acted with astonishing speed and precision. She immediately marched into the palace, seized the imperial seal, and summoned her nephew, Wang Mang, back to power. Dong Xian's fate was sealed in an instant. He was stripped of all his titles and accused of negligence during the emperor's illness. That night, he and his wife committed suicide. His clan was exiled, their vast fortune confiscated. The government sold off their assets, which totaled an estimated 4.3 billion cash coins, a sum roughly equivalent to $138 million today.
The epic experiment in love and power had come to a grim end, and now we can offer our final conclusion. The Western Han dynasty did not fall because an emperor fell in love with a man. It collapsed because its foundations were already rotten to the core. The strong, centralized system built by Emperor Xuan was a delicate balance that required a wise and capable monarch to maintain. His two successors, the weak Emperor Yuan and the dissolute Emperor Cheng, shattered that balance. They ceded power to consort clans, hollowing out the imperial authority. At the same time, the unchecked growth of the landed elite eroded the state's tax base, and the weakened government could do nothing about it, and the moral failings of these rulers provided the perfect ammunition for their ideological challenges. The core of Confucian thought ties the legitimacy of a ruler to his personal virtue, the so-called mandate of heaven. The rise of Dong Xian was the last straw that broke the back of the Lu family's legitimacy. His outrageous promotion proved in the most extreme and undeniable way that the Han Emperor had lost his basic virtue. The Liu family's mandate of heaven was exhausted. This paved the way for the rise of that ambitious man of virtue who was waiting in the wings, Wang Mang. Therefore, the sudden death of the Western Han was no accident. It was the final, violent symptom of a chronic disease. Dong Xian was not the cause. He was merely the raging fever in the final stage of the illness. And his story is not a simple morality play about same-sex love, but a profound political tragedy. It teaches us that even the mightiest empire can rot from within until a single, seemingly random event can bring the whole edifice crashing down.
In that very same year, 2 BC, the father of the fatherland, Augustus, was also facing a profound personal and political crisis. His only child, his daughter Julia, was arrested for multiple counts of adultery and treason. For an emperor who had made the restoration of traditional morality a centerpiece of his reign, this was the ultimate irony and humiliation. Augustus's own Julian laws had made adultery a public crime to be judged by the state. Now his own daughter had broken his own law. Faced with a scandal that could shatter his moral authority, Augustus's choice was not to cover it up, but to enforce the law. He personally exiled Julia to a barren island, where she would live out the rest of her days in harsh conditions. The decision surely broke his heart, but with this cruel act, he sent a clear message to the Roman world. No one, not even a member of the imperial family, was above the moral order he had established for the state. Morality may not be a requirement for politics, but for a great statesman, it is never a mere decoration. It is the foundation of rule, determining whether an empire rises to order or descends into the abyss.